I listened to a lot of albums this year, a lot of albums. I listened to this one, I listened to this one. I waited 5 years for 2 different albums to come out and they were amazing. I listened to an 80s Japanese city pop jazz album and it turns out the live version is even better. It is the end of the year, which means it is time to make some lists in terms of albums, but this one's gonna be a little bit different. This is a concept that I've been toying with for a while, which is the top discovered albums of the year, which means albums that didn't come out this year, but I really enjoyed listening to this year and just think they need their own list to survive in some kind of space like this. So the rules for this list are pretty simple. It's just albums that did not come out in the year of 2022 and that had a lot of replay value. And I want to get out there that this is not a pure ranking of each of these albums. These are just in terms of enjoyability, in terms of how much I listen to them. And if I were to rank them all in like a 0 out of 10 list, they probably would be slightly different. But this is my list, so shut up. But either way, here are 20 albums that I listened to this year that I think you should listen to as well, that I discovered for the first time this year. Starting things off at number 20, we have the album Introducing by DJ Shadow. This came out in like the late 90s, so missed it by just a little bit of time, but I think it's really interesting the way he incorporates all of these samples that he took from every different place. And I'm pretty sure the way I read this on TikTok, he didn't even make any of the music himself. He just kind of sampled it and then repurposed it into this completely different thing. And there's very little singing or talking on it. It's just a cool way of making an album, and especially for the time period, the way that he ended up doing all of this is just mind-blowing. So definitely go give that one a listen, a very unique one for me. At number 19, we have the album Michigan by Sufjan Stevens. I'm a huge Sufjan fan, and I never even really gave this whole album a listen before. I've listened to some of the singles. It's hard to pitch the idea of Sufjan Stevens just because, oh, it's a little more down, it's a little sadder, but also it's beautiful. And, you know, if you go for some kind of nature walk, or if you just sit there and let your emotions kind of wash over you, then it's definitely just a great way to experience not just music in general, but life, I guess. Not a huge fan of the entire thing. I do prefer Illinois, and actually Carrie and Lowell, an album he put out much later, is a 10 out of 10 for me. I'll get to that eventually. But it definitely shows the beginnings of his artistic style and where he wants to be in this point in his life. So very folky, very beautiful, definitely worth a listen. And Sufjan, if you're out there, I love you and I hope you're doing well. At number 18, we have the album Don't Go Tellin' Your Mama by Topaz Jones. I missed this one, I believe, by like just a year or so. But just very fun. In the polar opposite, this one's much more fun. Very soulful, funky, just a lot of different quirky elements to this album that I think play well with each other. I have not really listened to too much of Topaz Jones' other albums, but I just stumbled across this one somehow. It might have been from TikTok. Gotten a lot of good recommendations from TikTok this year. Just a lot of great chemistry going on in the release. They have put out an album before this, so they're not just completely newcomers, but yeah, if they put one out pretty soon, I'd be very interested in trying it. Go give it a listen. Again, links are all in the description to listen to this, so if you want something a bit more fun comparative to Michigan, I definitely recommend it. Yeah, great one. At number 17, we have the album Jacobine Chill by Jacob Collier. Love Jacob Collier. If you're a big music nerd like myself, or if you like music theory, or if you play an instrument, you've probably heard somewhat of Jacob Collier. Very smart musical talent that can put a lot into his music. He's very versatile, a lot of piano and so many different instruments that he plays. But this one I felt was a bit more reserved, a bit smaller of a release. If you're sometimes overwhelmed with some of the stuff that he puts out, I can understand how that would be off-putting to you. This one's only a handful of tracks. It's relatively short, around 20 to 30 minutes. And one of the more beautiful songs I've listened to this year, The Sun Is In Your Eyes. Just a beautiful guitar ballad. I'm a sucker for a guitar ballad. and just like a great love song that he's put out. And the rest of the songs on the album are pretty solid too. So that was one of the more interesting and heartwarming releases that I've listened to this year. So number 17, Jacobin Chill. I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it. It's like Jacob's Ben Chill, but Jacobin. He put out Jacobin Essentials this year, which is like a 10-track full album. That was more of a compilation of the Jacobin listens. I think it's kind of a series that he has going on. So if you want to listen to the other Jacobin albums, I haven't listened to all of them, but I've listened to that one, and it was pretty good. So do that. And speaking of huge eclectic musical palettes, we have the album Onda Tropica with their self-titled release. This primarily, I guess, is a Latin jazz album, but it encompasses so much more than that. It includes soul, rock, funk, again, jazz, but just a huge array of different sounds from, I think, like 20 different artists. And they're all, I believe, from either Latin America or South America. So, a huge worldly view on different types of music from all over the globe. It is just stunning to listen to at points. They even cover like a Black Sabbath song, so many different styles and sounds going on this, but I guess you can boil it down to Latin jazz if you want to put it in some kind of box. A lot of albums on this list are just more about personal taste than anything, and with the number 15 slot on this list, it kind of shows that. I totally understand if you won't be into it, but it's my list, so I don't care. It is the Sonic R soundtrack by Sega Sound Team, I believe. Just a really it's fun. That's all I can really say. It's got like so many pounding, like almost like Eurobeat, but like techno fuse, like things that I'm sure have been incorporated better on other albums. But I just found this one on a whim because I saw an old YouTube video by, I think, JonTron or someone that covered the game Sonic R and how shitty of a game it was. But I listened to the music they were playing in the background, and it just looked and sounded so fun. And I listened to the whole thing. It's pounding, it gets my heart pumping. It's just pure adrenaline at its peak. And yeah, I just enjoyed it. And it's not going to be for everyone. I totally understand that. But if you want just a fun, heart-pounding song, if you're just like a nerd that wants to listen to something at the gym that can kind of go with your tastes, then go with this one. Go with the Sonic R soundtrack. I never thought I'd be putting a soundtrack on this list, but I guess here we are. Here we are. We're right here. You're not. I'm here. At number 14 on this list, we have the album Time and Place by Caro Caro Bonito. Now, a lot of the KKB fans are probably going to want my head because I've heard a lot of different reactions to this album. A lot of people really, really, really love it, and I enjoyed it. It's not something that I put on every single day. Their sound isn't always something that really I have a go-to for, but this was just fun and experimental in its own way, and they reached out differently than what they'd been putting out beforehand. So beforehand, they were putting out like Bonito Generation, which was more of a fun, carefree pop album that is generally great, but it's kind of carefree. It doesn't really show artistic chops to a huge extent, and I think this was where it started to branch out a little bit more for me. Two major takeaways for me were Swimming and Only Acting. Those two songs are great, and I love a lot of what Caro Caro Bonito have been putting out before. I'm not sure if they're still putting out music as a group collective. I thought they came out with a release a while ago that said they weren't doing that, but I've seen Sarah, the lead singer from the band, do singles here and there with other artists, so at least they're making music in some form. So if you want an interesting, poppier, but also still experimental at points release, Time and Place by Caro Caro Bonito definitely was a good listen and made it to number 14 on the list. So at number 13 on the list, kind of pivoting a little bit, and if you're a bit of an older generation listener, you might know this one. It is Never Too Much by Luther Vandross. What a weird pick for me, I know, but I think it just came up on Spotify one day and I just decided to listen to it. I've heard people reference to Luther Vandross in some of their lyrics in the past, and I feel like maybe in like a movie I've seen someone put on, oh, go put on Luther, we're gonna go have sex or something. And it makes sense, you know, this came out in the 80s. It's just buttery, smooth, like songs you wanna put on when you're doing the deed. And obviously it's a little dated of a sound, but it's just so fun, just so funky, filled with a lot of different jams. And I've never really listened to one of his albums all the way through before, and this one definitely was a good way to dive a little bit into his discography. And I've listened to some other ones, but I think this one was the most fun for me this year. Also, holy shit, some of them bass lines are just amazing. And that's kind of a staple of like 80s funk and R&B sounds, so definitely nailed that one. Very, very sexy album, this one. And also, like I said on TikTok, I could definitely see why a lot of babies were made to this, so. Okay, at number 12, number 12, we have the album Songs of Hers by the artist Hers. This one is a little bit tragic for me, just because, unfortunately, the band did pass away. I believe there's only 2 of them, but they did pass away a handful of years ago due to a car accident they were both unfortunately in, so rest in peace to both of them. But this was the last album that they had put out, and it is just beautiful. The main reason I put this album on here is the song What Once Was. Just a heartbreaking now in context song that, yeah, that guitar melody in What Once Was just really stuck with me. That beautiful hand-pick. I'm a sucker for hand-picked guitars. I don't know, what can I say? Also, the tracks Cool With You as well as Marcel have this amazing bedroom pop aesthetic that really stuck with me this year. Also a sucker for bedroom pop. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just a great sound, very personal, deep lyrics that dive into heartbreak and relationships and so many other topics that I think are very poignant. And definitely check it out. And obviously rest in peace to both of the members of Hers as well. At number 11, we have the album Dinner Party by Terrence Martin, Robert Glasper, Ninth Wonder, and Kamasi Washington. Well, there's a lot of people on this one. This came out, I believe, during COVID in the year 2020. Real fun year for everyone. But this album is a bit more straightforward, just more jazzy, more soulful, more R&B. A lot of those combinations together surprisingly really work. I love Kamasi Washington. The Epic is just a great jazz album. Robert Glasper I've heard on a couple releases, including the new Denzel Curry album. He was on the opener, I believe. And a lot of different other releases, of course, not only as a producer, but a performer as well. And I've never really listened to Ninth Wonder or Terrence Martin too much before this, but this album, which I believe is only like 23 minutes, 7 songs, short, sweet, to the point. If you need just for like a quick car ride, I would definitely recommend that as well. Just a lot of fun. I feel like they all came together remotely, hopefully, during the recording of this, and just kind of let it all hang out and let loose and just had a good time. And I love when you can tell on an album that everyone's having fun making the album. It makes the end product so much more enjoyable. So now we're in the top 10, and we're gonna kick off the top 10 with a very fun one for me. This album is called Paper Mache Dream Balloon by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, which is a mouthful, but a very fun and eclectic band that I enjoyed this year a lot. So yeah, King Gizzard has a very strong fan base just because they're known for putting out a lot of different albums. Like, they have a huge discography. And this one, I think, kind of pairing with Nonagon Infinity is one of their more interesting releases. They kind of stuck to a formula that they don't really stick to, and that is making everything acoustic, which includes the guitars, the strings, the percussion, which has kind of got more like a kid's playground kind of vibe to it. Just the way that they produce this album, I think, is interesting to say the least. Very fun, very, very fun release from them, which, if you listen to some of their other releases, falls in line a little bit, but not too much. I'm not the biggest King Gizzard fan. It's just hard to keep up with the amount of volume that they put out in terms of albums that they put out. They put out, I believe, like 5 or 6 albums in one year a couple years ago, so If you're not just a super fan of them, then it's hard to listen to everything. But this was one of the first albums I've listened to from them, and it was fun, and I enjoyed it, and I recommend it. So it's got a cool like claymation cover too. So if you want to get into them as a band, I wouldn't recommend listening to this first. But if you just want something that's nice and has some fun, quirky production to it as well, this one stuck around with me a lot this year. At number 9, we have the album Ho Tales by Jasmine Sullivan. Shout out to John White for showing me this album while I was in New York with him. Very, very interesting way of releasing like this, the track list of this. I love the female empowerment on this because, you know, with a male released album that talks about sex and how open their sex life is, you know, no one really bats an eye, but as soon as a woman talks about it, oh, you gotta, you know, cancel her and get her off the airwaves. So with this one, it leans more into that, and I appreciate that. And the way that the track listing is you'll have one track that's more of like an interlude, and it says like, you know, whoever's name's story or whatever it is, and they talk about, you know, a sexual experience, whether it's good or bad, or maybe not even sexual, just kind of like a relationship that they were in at the time, and how that changed their life a little bit, kind of playing into the title of Ho Tales, spelled H-E-A-U-X, to kind of have a play on that as well. And then the song right after that will be this great, you know, soulful rap done by Jasmine, who I think has just an amazing voice, really stand out. A lot of people are overlooking her right now. Go check her out if you're into that lane of things. Just a great female rapper and singer, and a lot of great features. Really love the Anderson .Paak song. That one really stood out for me as well. Yeah, this one really was unique in its own special way, and was worthy of a top 10 spot for me. At number 8, we are going with Somewhere City by Origami Angel. This one is just so fast and blistering rock music. Not necessarily metal, more of like an indie underground, heavier rock sound that was so unique and out there that I really enjoyed it. Came out right before COVID and has a lot of like lyrical and emotional depth to it as well. And Origami Angel in a few years has gone from very, very unknown to like a much larger band. So shout out to them. Really love what they're doing, and all the output they put out, especially on this album. I showed this off to a couple of my friends, and they also seem to like it a lot. So I know that they put out an album this year. I haven't really gotten around to it, but hopefully I will get to it at some point. I've listened to, again, a lot of music. So yeah, they've been putting out a lot of good music recently too. So Somewhere City, number 8, definitely a good spot for it. Go check it out. At number 7, however, we are going with an album that I mentioned very early on in this video, but I'd never really described it too much. That is Mint Jams Live by Cassiope. It is an early 80s Japanese city pop, jazz, fusion, hybrid thing that really took me by storm this year. It was very popular on TikTok, and that's how I got the recommendation to listen to it. But it just really stuck with me. I don't know what it was about it, whether it was the horns or the piano or whatever kind of instrumentation that they added this year. Because there's no lyrics, and I'm a singer, so I would usually get drawn in by someone's voice. But just something about it was so enchanting and drew me in that I just couldn't stop listening to it this year. And also something weird is that this is live. They have an actual like studio version of these songs, but something about the live format, something about them working together and not sounding like they're in separate rooms, the chemistry really shows on this release. And that's something that I enjoy about albums as well, is when you can tell that they really enjoy what they're putting out there. And surprisingly, this is one of my favorite live albums of all time. I'm not necessarily a live guy. I usually will prefer a gussied up studio version, but the way that they performed it, it didn't need any gussying up. And the applause breaks at the end of songs weren't too overbearing. It wasn't just one continuous recording of a performance that they'd done somewhere. It was chopped up like it was a studio album, and it just sounds great. The way that they produced this version of the album is superior, in my opinion, to the studio version, though they're pretty much the same songs. So relatively short too. I think only around half an hour of these bops. I really did enjoy it this year. One of the stranger albums that I've listened to just out of context, but give it a try if you're into that kind of thing. I didn't think I was going to be into it, but I really was at the end of the year. So at number 6 on the list, I have a tie. They're both by the same artist, but I enjoyed them both separately, and I didn't want to bog down the list in 2 different spots, so I think I'd put them both here. It is Untourable album and also Uncle Jazz by Men I Trust. Men I Trust actually figured out a way to make it onto my Spotify Wrapped this year as one of my top 5 artists, so thanks to them. But yeah, these albums both enchanted me this year, as well as put me to sleep, but in a good way. There was a good mix of like bedroom pop elements as well as like gloomy funk instrumental bits, which I know, again, isn't really for everyone, but the vibe that it put off this year really matched with a lot of different feelings, and I do resonate with that sound usually. Also, Untourable album came out in the very early beginnings of 2021, so it was still in that phase of not being able to go out and do everything, which played into the theming of the title, Untourable album. You know, they couldn't go out and tour it, so I think the way that they released some of the songs on this played into that theme as well. And even Uncle Jazz had some kind of jazzier bits to it. It wasn't, again, horn heavy or whatever, but the theming of both of the albums, I think, played into what they were going for on it. So it made sense in context with what they were doing. So if you're into that style of music, again, definitely recommend, as I do all of the albums on this list. Even one of my favorite songs of all time, Show Me How, made it onto Uncle Jazz, although it had a caption called Album 5, so I'm not sure if they ended up scrapping a whole album, because I think there are about 7 or 8 songs from Album 5 in parentheses at the end of some tracks on Uncle Jazz with a heavier bulk. That one's a bit longer, so I'm wondering how that played into it, but again, Show Me How made it onto Uncle Jazz, so really bolstered it even more, in my opinion. So again, 2 great albums. Listen to both of them. I think they both deserve their own time in the spotlight, and that is what my number 6 spot is. At number 5, however, is an album, in my opinion, is a bit harder to pin down. That is Strange Satisfaction with Woody and Jeremy. The title plays into it. It is a satisfaction that is strange. It is a bit more indie rock, but also a bit more jazz. Too Hot in LA was a big standout. Again, it's a bit shorter of a release, which I think, in my opinion, just might be what I enjoy more. I think my attention span has gone down drastically over the past couple years. I wonder why. It's got a lot of big funk elements to it as well. I think funk would be the best way of describing this. It's like white funk, I guess, in a way, which may not be the best thing in some people's minds, but you know, if you're into that, I certainly was into that. Fat Boys in the Gym of Love was a really interesting track that I'd listened to, as well as Hollywood Witches. Really cool vibes to it. Kind of had like a St. Paul and the Broken Bones feel, with a bit less like soul, I guess. But if you're into that kind of funkier indie, I guess, thing, and you're looking for some strange satisfaction that only lasts about 26 minutes and came out in the early years of COVID, listen to this. Also a very eye-catching album cover as well. As for number 4 on this list, we're going to be sticking in that short album lane with the album Pink Moon by Nick Drake. This is one of those albums, in my opinion, where you listen to it at first and you don't really enjoy it. I've done this with a couple albums as well, where on first or second listen, it's not really sticking with you. But then you revisit it maybe a year or like a month or so down the line, and you realize, oh my god, this album was much better than when I originally listened to it. And there's still some albums, in my opinion, where I wasn't really vibing with it, but someone else really enjoyed it, and then I had to do a double take, re-listen to it, and turns out it was amazing. And this is one of those for me, kind of similar one-note singer-songwriter projects where it's just him and a guitar, but it sounds like he's just on a spotlit stage where there's nothing else but him and a guitar and maybe some other instrumentations, but it's just so raw and emotional that it really just sits with you like deep in your soul. And I can really appreciate that kind of release from Nick Drake. In his brief lifetime, he put out very chilling and somber, you know, singer-songwriter cuts that really stuck with a lot of different artists. And while he didn't achieve the notoriety and popularity as someone in his field, maybe like a Van Morrison or like a James Taylor, the way that he portrayed these heavier emotional feelings, it was unlike no other. And I think that he deserves his own time in the sun to be enjoyed. And while this album is much older, came out in 1972, it does reflect a lot of what these newer age people that are following in his footsteps sound just like today. Again, people like I mentioned before, like Sufjan Stevens, have a similar style that create their own, and I think he laid a lot of the blueprints down as to what made those kinds of artists just click for certain listeners. So if you're into a bit more of a mellow listen, something that'll calm you down, if you need to meditate or do something that requires a bit less brain function, this album definitely will get you through those kind of things, and was just something that was so stunning I had to put it at number 4 this year. One of the more beautiful listens again this year. And we're going to be sticking with a bit of an older release on the next spot in this list. At number 3, we're in the top 3. It's going to be Asia by Steely Dan. Now, I really, really, really love this album. Now, just in terms of a ranking itself, this album is ranked very high for me. But again, this list is purely in terms of enjoyability and replayability this year. And it did have a lot of that, but it's not at number 1. We'll get to that in a bit. But just a really interesting pop and jazz fusion that Steely Dan is known to have. And it's becoming a bit more popular nowadays with people going back and listening to it. I feel like a lot of parents will really vibe with this. I know my parents listen to Steely Dan quite a bit. And, you know, some of their biggest singles that I have known for a while, like Peg and, you know, Deacon Blues, show up on this album, but never have I listened to the full album before. And this year I did, and I just kept listening to it and listening to it. It's only 7 tracks, but it's about 40 minutes in length. There are some longer ones, like the self-titled, as well as Black Cow. But again, those tracks are great, and I think you should listen to them. They're fun, they're calming. It's released in 77, I believe, so a bit of a throwback. So if you're looking for that kind of sound, that kind of vibe, just looking to relax but also still have fun without being too gloomy, if you want to be a little self-reflective, if you want to just listen to a good album, listen to Asia by Steely Dan. By most accounts, it's their best album. I've seen reviewers on TikTok that will give this album 10 out of 10s. I'm not that high on it just yet. I think in terms of rating an album, you need to give it probably around 2 to 3 years of full context and connections to your own life and just different aspects to give it a full 10. I'm sitting around a 9 and some change with this album, so maybe in some years' time that can get bumped up, but just now it's a great album, a fantastic album, a triumph in their catalog that deserves to be listened to in its own right. At number 2, however, we're going to be sticking with another old album. This album is even older. Came out in 1967. It was their Atlantic debut, and we're, of course, going with Aretha Franklin with I Never Loved a Man the Way I Loved You. What really piqued my interest with this album is that I saw that Rolling Stone had updated their top 500 albums of all time list, and I saw this album was hovering around 13 or so, and I was like, oh, maybe I should listen to that. I know Respect is on that album, but I'd never really given it too much of a thought after that. And, you know, obviously Aretha Franklin, beautiful, amazing talent in her own right, just absolutely stunning, an icon in her own right. Of course, rest in peace, she passed away a couple years back. But I never really thought that the rest of the album would be just as beautiful, just as iconic as some of her most iconic work of all time. I gotta stop saying the word iconic. It just has so much depth to it that I think goes overlooked. Some tracks, I Never Loved a Man the Way I Loved You, Soul Serenade, Do Right Woman, Do Right Man, obviously Respect, which they put at the beginning and also the end of the album because they knew it was going to be such a smash hit. Her version of A Change Is Gonna Come. Just so many different, incredibly important songs for their time that I think just kind of get overlooked because, oh, R-E-S-P-E-C-T is on the album. And her amazing vocal performance on this goes understated, I think. You know, talking about some of the best vocalists of all time, she has to be in that conversation. It's amazing, it's beautiful, it's powerful, it's soulful, it's all of these different adjectives that really just pair together so well. And when they say it's the number 13 album of all time, I totally understand it. Like, I'm not even gonna argue with you. It's her best album. It's her biggest album, I believe. You know, obviously Respect is one of those songs that really rocketed her to the mainstream, and especially for the time. It was 1967. So many things were happening in art and culture that she shook up even that. So huge, I'm gonna say huge respect to her. That's just such a bad pun, and I apologize. And finally, we're at the #1 spot for my best discovered albums that I've listened to this year list. And thank you all for watching so far. I appreciate you getting to this point if you have. Let's jump into #1, and that is going to be the album 2020 by Joe. Wow, what a release from him. If you're unaware, Joe is the musical pseudonym for actor Joe Kearney, I believe, or Joe Kearney. He plays Steve Harrington on Stranger Things. I found this artist from my buddy Gavin, who texted me out of the blue one day, and he says, hey, have you heard of this guy? I've been non-stop listening to this artist. And I had not. I had listened to Chateau, which is the kind of main single off of this, and I thought it was really great. And then I started listening to the album in its full and entire runtime, and it has a theme. The lead single, Showtime, starts off with him kind of getting woken up by someone banging on his door and saying, hey, you gotta go out and perform. And he kind of wakes up and then does all of these tracks that are so interesting, and then ends the album out by kind of repeating that, him going back into his own dressing room or green room and kind of falling asleep or doing whatever. So it has a theme, and I love a thematic album. I'm a sucker for that. So that has it, and also the music just happens to be really great as well. I'm actually gonna get my notes out for this so I can just read straight off of them. They're psychedelic pop tunes. Some of them have a really good earworm quality to them, especially Chateau, especially Roddy, especially Tentpole Shangri-La. So many great tracks off of this. And there are a lot of different sounds and aspects that he incorporates that sound very similar to other artists, so he doesn't just stick to one. But if you like any of these artists that I feel like sound similar in some way, you might like this. Prince, David Byrne or Talking Heads, David Bowie, George Clinton, The Weeknd, especially his newer album, Daft Punk and M83, I think, have different aspects of their music that I feel like Joe incorporates into his own sound. Even touches of Pink Floyd and Tame Impala at times. And while some of his influences are, again, worn heavily on his sleeve, he really does make it his own. Has a lot of replayability, very enchanting factors to it as well. Really compelling vocals, guitar performances are on point as well. The rock influences tracks like Flash Mountain had a great mix of influences as well. The angelic pop tracks, again, like Chateau, bring out really heavy nostalgic vibes, kind of, you know, wishing and yearning for a better time. Just so many emotional pulls in different directions that really made it one of the most enjoyable albums I've listened to this year. He really needs to put it on vinyl because I really want it on vinyl. It just blew me away, and I cannot get caught in like this weird soupy mix of music that he pulls me into. It's really just like this carousel ride that I can't seem to get off of, and it just draws me in and keeps me locked in, and that I need to listen to the whole album, that it has so many different left hooks. And the new album that he put out this year as well, The Side, is great in its own lane too. You'll probably see that on my year-end list that's coming up soon, hopefully. So, just a great album. Does it rank in terms of numbering higher or lower than Asia or the Aretha Franklin album? It's hard to tell, just because it's kind of comparing apples to oranges. But again, this list purely in terms of replayability and enjoyability, for me, it has to be number one. It's kind of my crown jewel of albums that I've listened to this year that didn't come out this year. This came out in 2019, even though it's called 2020. Kind of a optimistic look at the very sad future that the album laid out for itself, but just a really great debut for someone that I did not expect to be anywhere near this level of production or instrumentation or vocal performance. Just a great album. I really love that album. So my camera died in the middle of my outro, which is really fun. It's a really fun thing. So if you enjoyed listening so far, drop a like, leave me a subscribe, comment down in the comment section if you're feeling so inclined to. Get down there into Discourse to let me know if you've listened to any of these albums, and if you enjoyed them, or if you didn't enjoy them, and if you hate my guts, let me know. I would like to hear if you hate me. So stay tuned. Hopefully the year-end list, my top 20 albums of 2022 are coming up pretty soon. And yeah, that's gonna be it for me. Peace.